We got one more guest, one more segment here for this October 15th edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from wagertalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Going great, Adam. A couple good weeks of football. Always excited about this period of time because, it's an adjustment period. And if you follow the sport well, I'm talking specifically college football at this time, we go from non-conference play to conference play. And, it takes a lot of eyes on to see how these teams have done. It takes a lot of knowledge to be able to study and handicap the stats and see the strength of schedule differences. So it's a time of the year that I've had great success in and looking forward to the next few weeks as well.
Yeah, and speaking of this time of the year, we get to add NBA to the mix next week, too. Actually, a week from today. So, hey, just another sport to worry about.
Yeah, I worry very little about the NBA regular season. I'll start my NBA daily stat sheet, and that keeps me involved in it, looking at stats just over the last 10 days because of the ebb and flow in teams. But the NBA, I'm a one or two plays a week type person, finding that unique spot that fits something that I like. Other than that, I really don't get involved until the playoffs and finding spots here and there. But hey, I don't mind. I don't mind the NBA. I'm just not a huge fan of it.
So we did talk a little bit of NHL in our previous segment with Brian Blessing, the NHL season, about 2.5 weeks old or so now, but there is an angle that you wanted to mention here at the top of today's segment. You explicitly mentioned before we started recording here that you really wanted to talk about this. So sounds like it's going to be a good one for our listeners.
Well, it is. I do some angles for Dave Koken's radio show, the Joe's Angle of the Day. So I came up with this. And to me, number one, it makes sense. Number two, there's longevity. So, I'd like to share it, and we'll see if it has success tonight. But this goes all the way back since 2013. It's only happened 63 times or 69 times, excuse me. But it's a team off a home loss where they allowed 6 or more goals. And now they're at home again. So you got a goalie that's in bad form, or perhaps your backup goalie played. I don't know what the situation is. But those games have gone 37, 16, and 6, 69.8% to the over. The Jets lost to the Penguins on Sunday, 7-2. They play the Coyotes today. The total is 6. So, we have a 70% over system that makes sense to me that's been valid since 2013. It would say take the Jets and Coyotes over 6 tonight.
Well, and from a game flow standpoint, too, Winnipeg's had a lot of defensive injuries as well on the back end. So that's one that, makes sense both from a trend standpoint and probably from a matchup standpoint here tonight as well. So, again, that's Arizona and Winnipeg over the total of 6 here. And, again, 69%, very, very strong trend there, to say the least. Wanted to start off the segment here today with you, Rolf, talking a little bit of college basketball, seeing what you've done here over the last week since we last talked in preparation for the season.
It really has just been stats gathering. I go in and I pull all the stats and put them in my Excel files and start putting notes in. And I like going and looking each conference. I pull out their press conference releases, start taking notes on who they pick to win the conference, the all-conference players. So nothing tangible this week where I posted anything. I think by next week I'll be putting the information together in a postable form to be sharing it with some of my followers. So this week really just gathering and noting and dropping everything into my huge Excel files, and we'll see what information comes out of that by the end of next week.
When you say stats, I mean, what specifically are you looking for? Offensive and defensive efficiency type stuff, points per possession, or maybe stuff that's a little bit more basic, a little bit more foundational?
I use the advanced stats and the regular stats. I like looking at assists per game. I like looking at teams that lose point guards and marking out how many assists they had. I go and use the Ken Pom numbers. I use the Bartorvik numbers. So it's really a combination of what other people thought, the raw stats. Then I like looking at where people like Ken Pom and Bartorvik had a team last year as far as offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, possessions per minute for totals plays. So it really is a combination of the most basic stats and the advanced metrics. And I just want, while I don't have any secret formulas that turn in success, when you're looking at a team from last year, for the last 2 years, I should say, and you're trying to figure out how that team will transfer into this season, it's very important to know that, if you are a defensive efficient team and you lose Taco Fall, well, you know what? You don't have another 7'6" player in the wing. If you lose a point guard that, had a 3.8 assist to turnover ratio, yeah, you might have another point guard that fits that bill. So there's situations that you may be able to replace, and there's certain situations you aren't going to be able to replace.
A lot of people know Ken Pom. I don't know how many people know Bart Torvik. We talked about him a lot on last year's shows. We'll talk about him a lot this year as well. I just want to make sure that people definitely have that name out there, barttorvik.com. That is my favorite college basketball resource. And, not to dismiss Ken Pom or anything like that, but so many people use Ken Pom for so much. Odds makers have been using Ken Pom forever. Bart Torvik doesn't have that same level of steam, and I really love his information. So that's one I think is definitely worth keeping in mind. And I'm not sure if you want to echo those sentiments or not, but Torvik's definitely something our listeners should know about going into the college hoops season.
Oh, there's no question. When you get to November basketball, you are handicapping against Ken Pom. The Vegas casinos are looking at Ken Pom's projections, and that's very close to what the line is going to be with, there's some casinos that do some more work and do their average work, but we're talking about a November situation where they're in the middle of the NFL season. They're 3 quarters through the college football season. They're doing the NHL. They're doing the NBA. And all of a sudden, as we said, opening night of college basketball, there's 145 games. Well, they're taking what Ken Pom's giving them. So truly, Ken Pom used to be a resource to start the season. Now what I'm doing is trying to find the flaws in Ken Pom, or where my numbers differ from Ken Pom, and that's where you're going to find value.
All right, so we go over to the college football side of things here, and let's talk adjustments. Week 7 to Week 8, what you saw, what you didn't see, some of the power ratings adjustments you made. What were some of your big takeaways from Week 7?
Week 7, I think we saw that there's still a lot of bad teams and a lot of good teams. It's sort of like the NFL. We have some historic bad teams with the Connecticuts and the UMasses, but we're also now getting into rivalry week. We saw Bowling Green as a 26.5-point favorite knock off Toledo. We saw South Carolina as a 21-point favorite knock off Georgia. When we're talking rivalries in November, we always know about Ohio State, Michigan, and Auburn, Alabama, and South Carolina, Clemson. But a lot of times in midseason, we don't handicap these rivalry games the same, and I think we need to. I'm a big fan of betting the dog in these rivalry games, and Adam, being in the area, people don't know Bowling Green and Toledo is a fierce rival. Well, if you go to those schools, if you're an alum, those players playing on the field, it's every bit as intense as, Ohio State, Michigan. Yeah, on a much smaller scale. But I think we start looking at the situations now where these rivalry games start coming up. I usually downgrade my power ratings almost 1.5 or 2 points towards the underdog because of the intenseness of those games.
Well, and then there's one on Wednesday night even that you don't really necessarily think about with South Alabama and Troy. And I already recorded my video for over on our Bang the Book YouTube page. I haven't gotten it up as of yet. Couldn't get it up in time before we started recording. But that's one where Troy almost annually is far and away the better team. Head-to-head, Troy has a 4-3 edge. The last 4 years, the road team has won every game. So South Alabama 2-2 the last 4 years. 1 in 2017, the game after Troy beat LSU. South Alabama probably has no business being in that game more often than not with Troy's talent level, but they are, and it's always close. And there are a lot of games that are like that here. And in particular, when you talk about teams, and this will be something that we can touch on in subsequent weeks here, but when you've got a team that maybe has 2 wins and 4 games left to go, they're not making a bowl game. Their bowl game becomes that rivalry game. So it's a very important angle here in the conference play regular season for sure.
Yeah, it's an angle I use very, very often. There are no plays this week, but next week there will start to be a ton when a team clinches its non-bowl eligibility by getting their 7th loss, and then they're an away dog, it's an automatic fade for me. I may not use that play or bet that play, but I don't ever remember betting a team that got their 7th win, which means they're no longer bowl eligible. Often that's when a coach gets fired because there's nothing else to play for. And now they're on the road as an underdog again. So no plays fit that mold. There are some teams that I believe got their 7th loss, but none are away dog this week. So we'll talk about it more next week, but it's certainly a situation I'll play on. Another, probably the most surprising game to me last week. Well, I say surprising, but then I gave reasons to why I like the other side. UNLV is so banged up, and obviously being out here, I follow them closely, going to Vanderbilt. Well, last week when I was reading about the UNLV game against Vanderbilt, all of a sudden you had a Vanderbilt team that, had 1 win on the year. It was a non-cover against Northern Illinois. And Derek Mason goes up to his grad transfer, Riley Neal, who was from Ball State, his first year here. And he says, hey, Riley, play well. I don't want you looking over your shoulder, but, Deuce Wallace is going to be our quarterback next year, and I'm going to start playing him. When you find situations that you have a team that's a 2-touchdown favorite and you have a quarterback looking over his shoulder, again, those are just type of situations that you have to jump on. Now, unfortunately, they are playing a UNLV team that, quarterback banged up, running back banged up, that I couldn't play. But it just shows that when kids are playing with pressure down the stretch, it doesn't matter if you're a senior grad transfer, you can play as poorly as anyone.
All right, so let's take a look at 3 games here for this Week 8 card, and we start in the Pac-12, game 359, 360 here, Arizona State and Utah. Utah, a 13.5-point favorite in this one, total 48.5, so low total, another big spread. We've seen quite a few of these games here so far this year. What are you thinking about this one here in Salt Lake City?
I do. I lean with the under in this. And, this game is right where my number is. I would love to fade Arizona State coming off that Washington State win. Going to Cal, playing Washington State, going to Utah, having another road game on deck. Utah impressed me. Moss is back now, and when Moss is healthy, that gives them the dual threat with Huntley, and, Huntley with a clean 9-0 ratio and Moss averaging 7.5 yards per carry. And you look at what Arizona State has done, and everyone talks about their defense, and yes, they're only allowing 18 points per game and 355 yards per game. But the offenses you faced, Kent State, Sacramento State, Michigan State, you could say they're a running team, but they're not really. I mean, they're just an inept offense. Colorado's not a running team. Cal has no offense. Washington State, we know, is not going to run the ball. So I think this is one of those skewed stats that people are going to say, Arizona State only allows 92 yards per game and 3.0 yards per carry. They're going to be able to slow Zach Moss. No, they're not. They have those stats because they haven't played anyone. I think with Zach Moss, I think Utah can get margin. I lean under, but I also lean with Utah in this game because of that situation that ASU is going to have to play from behind. Yeah, Jaden Daniels got a drive against Washington State at home last week to get that late touchdown and score. But going to Utah is an entirely different situation.
I like to talk about box score study and about the importance of that. And one of the most intriguing box scores to me last week was the Arizona State-Washington State game, in the sense that Washington State had 30 more pass attempts, 18 more completions, and got outgained, 532 to 498. So that kind of speaks to how bad that Washington State defense is, that, again, they gave up 5 bills against a team that threw the ball 30 fewer times than their offense did. So, it's very hard. And that's the thing about college football this year, is that I think it's been very, very hard to read a lot into the outcomes, because a lot of these teams are just wildly inconsistent. And some of these teams wind up with these good offensive performances against bad defenses, while Utah's defense is very, very good. I would not expect Arizona State to do nearly as much offensively in this game. How much do you want to take away from what Arizona State did last week, carry it over into this week? The answer is probably not much.
Agree with that. And then, I agree with you with the box score study. Well, let's take a look at Utah. And yes, Utah, you could say the same thing. Utah is allowing 272 yards per carry, 272 yards per game, 2.4 yards per carry. But the offenses, BYU's not a great offense. USC could be good. Washington State, Oregon State. But when I look at Utah's defense, to me, the most telling stat is what a team does against their opponent and against what that opponent has averaged on the year. Well, Utah has held BYU, Northern Iowa, Northern Illinois and Idaho State, Washington State and Oregon State all do a season low in yards, and they've held all 5 of those foes to a season average of 159 yards under their average. So when you can go and say, hey, listen, teams have held Washington State down to a degree, but we held Washington State to their season low, and we held Washington State to 271 yards below their season average. Last week, we held Oregon State to their season low. We held Oregon State to 259 yards below their season average. So I really do like looking at season averages in the last couple of weeks on how a team has done, because again, many times in October, we're not comparing apples to apples. There's some Power 5 teams like Baylor who have played the number 100 schedule in the country, and there's other Power 5 teams that have played a top 10 schedule. So how do you compare the yards per game? Again, to me, I really look at the averages of what those teams allowed and how the opponent did against those averages.
All right, so we move to the Big 12 here. Game 377, 378, TCU and Kansas State. I think this is a particularly interesting game. I like the other side of this one from where the line is moving. TCU now a 3.5-point road favorite in Manhattan. Total of 46 here. Is this a line move that you agree with?
I can't back Kansas State. Chris Kleiman's done great, and yeah, he got a win against Mississippi State. Well, the win against Nichols doesn't impress me. The win against Bowling Green obviously doesn't impress me. The Mississippi State game, you got outgained by 83 yards, and you just did enough to score 31 points. You put up 244 against Oklahoma State, 341 at home against Baylor. I think the TCU team here on defense can shut them down. I don't think K-State can keep enough offense with Dugan and Anderson. And, it's a team that I do like TCU in this spot. And I think Kansas State gets exposed with a third straight loss.
See, what's interesting to me here is you've got a first-year head coach in Kleiman, and they're coming off of a bye. And I think that this is a really good litmus test kind of week for them to see what they're able to do. Because the first time they came off of a bye, they played Oklahoma State. They only managed 13 points. They didn't play particularly well in that game. Now you wonder, how do they do here in this spot? They gave up 373 rushing yards to Oklahoma State coming out of a bye. Was that a learning opportunity for Kleiman and for his team? Will they look better here in this spot? My line on this game is Kansas State -1.5. I haven't been impressed with TCU much this season, but hey, I think this is a game where we do find out a lot about both of these teams. I'll probably play it because my numbers suggest that I should. But like you said, Kansas State is a tough team to back right now.
They're going through their issues. You have a team that is averaging 390 yards per game, but you want to talk about box score study, and that's where it's very fake. 573 against Nichols and 521 against Bowling Green. There's going to be a lot of teams that put up 500 plus yards against those two teams. So it's the 17 first downs against Mississippi State and the 8 first downs against Oklahoma State that bother me, where, no long drives. TCU on the flip side, their defense has held 3 foes this year to under 10 first downs. One was Purdue on the road, and one was Kansas, and one was Arkansas Pine Bluff. But to still hold 3 different opponents to under 10 first downs, that tells me something. And it's a situation where Patterson, has his up and down years. I don't think the Iowa State loss was horrible. I had Iowa State as a better team. And the SMU loss, SMU to me is that good of a team this year. So they may have looked past SMU a little bit, and SMU bit them. So at 3-2, I do like the TCU card. I don't have them. I don't have them in my mix as far as my top 10 plays go. So they're not going to be on the board for me. But I do have a definite lean with them where I gave them a check mark going through when I did my early analysis this week.
TCU also off of a bye. Certainly we know a little bit more about Gary Patterson off of a bye than we know about Chris Kleiman. So we'll see what happens there in that game. Should be a pretty good one, though, in Manhattan. One more game on the college side I want to touch on here. A couple of teams I know you were very high on coming into the season in the Mountain West Conference, Air Force and Hawaii. Air Force a 3-point favorite heading out to the island.
Again, unique situation for Air Force being an away favorite. I think it does warrant it this year that they deserve to be an away favorite. And you look at it, well, can they handle it technically? Well, they have in the past. Air Force is 0-7 as an away favorite. They haven't handled it in the past. What I was going to continue saying is what has happened is they've been able to move the ball. They're 10-1 over under when they're an away favorite. Hawaii on the flip side, 10-3 over under as a dog. And I think that right there is going to tell you which way I'm leaning in this game. Hawaii has had an issue stopping the run. Obviously, we know Air Force option team is going to get their rushes, but allowing the 6.3 yards per carry to Arkansas State at home concerns me. Allowing the 6.1 yards per carry to Washington and Oregon State, not so much. But on the year, you're allowing 5.3 yards per carry. The offense is going to get theirs. They've been running a lot of plays at home when they're in a situation to push the tempo. They've done so. The Washington game, when they're on the road, they had 85 plays. The Oregon State game, which was a close game, they had 77 plays. Even though Air Force slows the tempo here, the Air Force defense is always solid. You look at their numbers at the end of the year, and you look at them and you say, wow, this team really slows people down. Again, box score study, as you said, you have to look at who they've played. And, when you play San Jose and Boise and Navy and Fresno, those are slower. Well, Boise's not a slower paced team this year. But I will say this. The one thing that goes against my lean on the over in this, I talked about averages. Air Force has held 3 teams to a season low this year. Colgate, again, doesn't count, but they did. They went to Boise. They held Boise to 355 yards on the road. That was Boise's season low. Last week against Fresno, they held Fresno to 268 yards. That a season low. The Boise game, short week at home, Boise prepping for the option. The Fresno game at home. I think going on the road here, the defense has allowed 64.5% completions. We know what Cole McDonald has done, completing over 67%. McDonald's issues, those interceptions when he got pulled a couple times already this year because of throwing picks. I think he's a cleaner quarterback now. I think Hawaii can move the ball. I think Air Force will be able to run against the Hawaii D, again, allowing 5.3 yards per carry. My number is right at this number, so I'm not going to give an opinion on the side, but I do like the over in this game.
Well, and also, too, here, when you look at, you mentioned Cole McDonald and all the turnover issues that he's had, this isn't really an Air Force team that forces a lot of takeaways either. So, they only have 3 interceptions here on the season thus far. That's one of the lowest numbers in the country. So, again, maybe that's something that allows Hawaii to keep the football. They should move it. Air Force should move it. I think you're on the right track there with that one. I agree here. My number is actually in the pick'em range. So maybe a little bit of a lean towards Hawaii, but not something I really love, especially with how porous their run defense has actually been. I guess if you want to throw one out there, you can. I don't want to hijack any of your premium plays that you're going to have over at Wager Talk here, but since you didn't have too many strong opinions on the sides here for the games we did touch on, any sides on your radar for Saturday that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I do like Army against Georgia State. The Army team has proven to me they are legit. You have a situation where Army coming off back-to-back losses. The loss against Tulane at home. They gave up 528 yards. Well, we've seen Tulane as a pretty good team. Last week in their last game at Western Kentucky, there's been a couple times I've been out with Brian or Brad the last couple weeks and have talked about how impressed I've been with Western Kentucky's D. So you had a team with Army that you went on the road and had to take a Western Kentucky team that had been prepping for you and ready to go. Now you have a Georgia State team that has absolutely been gashed on the road. They're allowing 200 yards per carry, 200 yards per game. I can't even talk this morning. Excuse me, guys. 5.6 yards per carry. Oh, yeah, by the way, and they're allowing 65% completions. I don't see Army getting slowed down one bit. And the Army D, has not been bad. Again, besides that Tulane game, this is the same team that held Michigan to 340 yards. They held Rice to 243. They held Western Kentucky to 362. In this game, I have Army as an 8.5 point favorite, I believe, on my power ratings. They will be on my card as a best bet this week.
No, it's all good. I mean, there's so much stuff going on here throughout all the different markets. I completely understand that, hey, sometimes there are days I don't even know what day it is. So I completely understand where you're coming from there with that. But let's transition over to the NFL side of things here. Week 6 to Week 7. What were some of your Week 6 takeaways, Rolf?
Let's mention the road teams. I mean, the road teams this year to date, are 64%. The unders year to date are 56.3% so far. We're seeing teams that a lot of surprises this year. I've bounced back and forth so much looking at teams that I thought were really trash, the Oakland Raiders. Then what do? They go out and beat Indianapolis, and they go out and beat Chicago and London. The San Francisco surprise, no surprise for me. I bet them to make the playoffs originally. They're playing a little better than I thought, but a lot of that I think is the situation. The Saints defense has surprised me as much as any, what they've done the last three games, holding opponents to under 300 yards per game in that stretch. And the backup quarterbacks. We're seeing that Kyle Allen and Teddy Bridgewater. I guess Bridgewater shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Teddy Bridgewater now as a starter going back in his career, I had tweeted this out last week, is 28-7 against the spread lifetime. And 2 of those losses were game 16s that he got thrown in to start. So in a meaningful game, Teddy Bridgewater now 28-5 as a starter, as an NFL starter.
Yeah, there have been a lot of people with that fade Bridgewater mentality here of late too, and obviously it hasn't really worked out too well for them. A couple of games I want to talk about here first, and game 453, 454, Houston and Indianapolis is really interesting to me here. You've got Houston off of a big win over the Chiefs. You've got them playing really, really well. The Colts coming off of a bye, and a much-needed one at that. What do you think about this one here in the AFC South?
I do like Houston in this game. And what's the secret to Houston? Well, if Deshaun Watson gets a clean pocket like he did the last 2 games, putting up 592 yards in Atlanta and 472 yards at Kansas City, we know he's going to do well. Can the Colts get a pass rush? Well, they had 4 sacks against a banged-up Mahomes. They had 4 sacks against Tennessee, which, we see Mariota has now perhaps been benched. And then 4 sacks against Rivers in the opener. And we know Rivers is a step or 2 slow. So, Indy's pass rush to me is up in the air. Will they be able to get to Deshaun? I think they'll be able to get to him a bit. But I believe the Houston team's for real. When you can rush for, 150 plus yards and 4.8 yards per carry like they have the last 2 weeks. Yeah, Kansas City's rush defense is as bad as it gets. I understand that. but you also have the people to stretch the field. I am a Houston fan. I think their defense is legit. I think that, JJ is now back into it. Yeah, he missed his partner on the other side on the defensive line, but now they're learning how to play with him getting double teamed and how to take advantage of it. I think the Colts are 3-2 because of their situation of who they've played when they played them. And, they very easily, the Atlanta win went down to the wire. The Tennessee went down to the wire. The KC win, was everyone banged up. They could easily be 1-4. So looking at the schedule, looking at the way the teams are playing in current form, I do like Houston, even coming off that big win, playing a second of back-to-back road teams against a team that's rested.
Yeah, the one, devil's advocate point I would make here, I do trust Frank Reich coming off the bye. I'm not a huge Bill O'Brien guy. Obviously, he's done some things to fix that offensive line, and the Texans are humming right along now. But that would be my one reservation here, is I think Frank Reich's going to have a really good game plan coming out of the bye for Houston. Whether or not his team can execute, I guess we'll find out. But that would be the opposite thought that I would have here in this one. And not a game I think I'm going to have in any context or anything like that. But that would be the one thing that would maybe, change my mind a little bit here about this game is Frank Reich and the game planning I think that he can do here for this one. One other game to talk about here. You just mentioned it. Teddy Bridgewater doing so well as a starting quarterback. The Saints take on the Bears here. The Bears coming off of a bye as well. I guess I can't talk today either. After that game in London, after losing to the Oakland Raiders, the market kind of on New Orleans here when they've been against them the last several weeks.
Yeah, well, they're on the Saints, so now I'm going to fade the Saints, despite having that Bridgewater record I gave you. When I break down this game, the reason Teddy Bridgewater's playing so well is you look at when he came in against Seattle, what happened? They returned a punt for a touchdown and scored a touchdown. They led 14-0. The reason they played well against Dallas, a defense at home allowing 257 yards against a Dallas team we haven't seen good, a 9-3 halftime lead, never played from behind. Against Tampa Bay, again, had the yardage edge, never played from behind. Against Jacksonville, had the lead early, never played from behind. So Bridgewater's been in the perfect position, having a solid defense and never having to play from behind changes the way you play quarterback. Kamara's done enough, and Michael Thompson has stretched the field, and they dumped off a lot of passes to Kamara. But I think you look at a road game against Seattle, a Sunday night game against Dallas, a division home game for you to take control of your division, then going to Jacksonville on the road, now playing a second to back-to-back road games against a Bears team off a loss that allowed a season-high 398 yards per game. Bears defense, the best in the country. Low-scoring game, but I think I'm not afraid to lay the points with the Bears in this spot. And if the Bears get the early lead and force Bridgewater to throw, we've seen a lot of better quarterbacks struggle in that situation. The key to the Bears is getting the early lead, and at home in that role, I do favor Chicago this week.
Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Well, continue to check out the free information. I'm old school. I do a one-page schedule for college football and the NFL for people that want to print it off. I have the Monday morning circle lines on the college. I have the look-ahead lines from the Hilton. I have my college football stat report sheet. At a glance, it's going to tell you a team's schedule, how many plays they run, turnover margin, yards per game diff, points per game diff, yards per play diff. I'll do an NFL stat report as well. The Gridiron Guide is a college football newsletter that has one-sheet matchups per teams. And again, probably by the next time we talk, I hope to have some college hoops information up there. If not, it'll be shortly after at the end of next week.
Well, make sure you follow Rolf on Twitter at CalSportsLV. A wealth of great information there on a daily basis. And then, of course, a lot of good stuff over at wagertalk.com as well. Rolf Michaels, appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Adam. Always a pleasure.